Well, welcome back for our final afternoon session. You know, it's funny, I was making notes to ask questions on my cell phone here because I forgot to bring a piece of paper. But one of the things I wanted to ask, though, was, and it really wasn't touched on, and maybe I'll ask you first, Richie. So one of the things that we've been focused on and talking about, of course, is how, let's say, and we've sort of stuck with Tibetan Buddhism, but maybe you could comment or give your thoughts on, is there a common pathway that, as an example, the breathing exercises promoted by Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, and certainly part of other Indian traditions, yogic traditions, or transcendental meditation. Is there a common pathway here? Does it all relate to breathing? Does it all relate to increasing the parasympathetic nervous system output?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think that there may be some important common elements across a range of different contemplative practices. We don't have at this point, and I mean we in the scientific community, and by the way, I apologize to this group over here. The chairs are such that it's a little hard, but I will make an effort. But it's... Thank you, Rinpoche. Good.
See how easy compassion is?
I should have done that before. Thank you. The kind of studies that we need are studies where the same individuals are taught different practices so that within the same individual, the extent to which common circuits are activated, common changes in the autonomic nervous system can be evaluated. Those kind of studies don't exist. And so it's a little difficult, given the extant scientific research, to say with any confidence on a scientific basis whether there are commonalities or not. I can say that based on most of the research that's been done, for example, with transcendental meditation, with changes in brain electrical signals, is very different than the changes that we see in practitioners like Mingyur Rinpoche and other practitioners when they do the kind of practice that we talked about. Very different. And so while there may be certain elements in common, I think there are other elements that are going to be different, and I think it's very important to recognize. I often, in audiences in America, lay audiences, I often say that meditation is kind of like the word sports. There are many different kinds of sports. They're done very differently. They have different characteristics, different goals. And so I think that meditation practices are similar. There's just an enormous diversity. In the program that Mingyur Rinpoche developed, the Joy of Living program, it's a secular program. I don't know how many, but there are hundreds, literally hundreds of meditation practices that are part of that program. And one of the, I think, virtues of something like that is, again, it's predicated on the view that one size is likely not to fit all, and so people can sample and discern what may be most helpful for them. But from a scientific perspective, we just don't know at this point in time.
Rinpoche, let me ask you a question. Have you heard of, or are you aware of, any Tibetan monks that say, I'm more interested in transcendental meditation and I'm going to go off there? Or do you know of any instances where monks, Tibetan monks, look at other meditative type of practices?
I don't know about transcendental meditation. Very less knowledge about that. And yeah, in the Tibetan Buddhists, we have so many different types of meditation. So some monks may connect it with more with the experiential level, so what we call view meditation, conduct, some related with the view first, some related with the experience like meditation first, some related with the conduct, begin with doing something. So depends also personality, what we call body personality, speech personality, mind personality. The body personality has more like to work with image, form, shape, color. And speech is more like verbal, label, words. Mind is more like feeling, intuition. So, for example, if you go to the mountain and you really enjoy the mountain, nice view, nice temperature, so happy. So when you come back, think of mountain. The image comes first, means body family. And the labeling, the words come first. It's like speech family. And the feeling comes first. It's the mind family. So according to that, there's a different type of meditation. And then that is which meditation is suitable for what, it depends, yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the challenges, because I think what we see is, as you were saying, there may be many paths to nirvana, right? And I think we have to be cognizant that there's not one or get attached to one per se. Let me ask you a question related to the marshmallow test. We're going to have some volunteers here soon. So do you think, and that's very powerful data following those children who sort of took one or waited for two, and then you made a statement, well, maybe if we could teach them earlier, but the question is it preordained potentially, and can you really interfere? As an example, if you look at, there's some opinions as an example about when you find a certain type of cancer, the outcome is already preordained when you find it. The question is, even at that point, at least to some extent, and I know this gets into environment effect versus genetics, but how powerful is that, and can you really intervene? Because we know even at 4 or 5, there are children who demonstrate psychopathy, and you can't change that.
Yeah. Well, a few comments. I think that, first of all, it's a great question and really an important one. I think the most honest answer is we don't know. We just don't know. The idea, when scientists say that we can change something, particularly when it comes to a behavioral characteristic, I bristle a little at that comment, because how do you know? How do you know we can't change something? Where's the data? Show me the data that something actually can't be changed. A behavioral characteristic, any behavioral characteristic. And I don't think there are good data showing you can't change things, but I also don't think there are good data that say you can. And so I think that we just don't know. I think that when it comes to something like psychopathy, say, in a very young child, and for those who don't know these jargon labels, psychopathy is antisocial behavior, very significant antisocial behavior. I think that it's likely that very intensive interventions are going to be required, really intensive. And they're usually kids who show psychopathic characteristics early on, typically are products of abusive families. They're both genetics as well as environmental contributions. And so it's a heavy loading, if you will. And I think that will require very intensive intervention. But, you probably are aware of this, Jim, and you probably know this better than I do. But there was some work done a number of years ago with stroke patients who have a hemiparesis. So they have a stroke on one side of their brain and half their body is paralyzed. And what these investigators did, and it took them quite a long time to get human subjects approval to do this study, what they did is they actually took the good side of the body and they placed the good side of the body in a whole body cast. And they immobilized the good side of the body in the initial case for 16 weeks. So their good side of the body was completely immobilized for 16 weeks. And so in some sense, they were doing an intervention 24 hours a day for 16 weeks continuously, and their brains, at least in 2/3 of the sample, got completely rewired. And so there was a huge change. And some of these cases were stroke patients who had had a complete paralysis on one side for more than 10 years, and they showed very significant, not in all cases, but in some cases they showed very significant recovery. And so that's a radical intervention. And it may be that we need radical interventions of the sort that for the kind of extreme cases that you're describing. But I think before we accept the null hypothesis that something can't be changed, I want to see the proof. And I don't think we have evidence for any behavioral trait that really demonstrates that it can't be changed.
Let me ask a question maybe related to this. In the context of Buddhist monasteries, are there monks who, because sometimes people have a sense that life is wonderful for the monks because they're meditating and they're always connecting with their inner self and compassion.
Not all the monks are meditating.
Which ones here aren't? Say those who are meditating. But are there incidences of mental disorders, depression, or unhappiness that prevail? And as a result, again, getting back to this issue of the people we see out there, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, yourself, others, who, again, is this sort of a subset of people who have a genetic predisposition to be able to be at this highest level versus, quote unquote, the average person? What do you think?
Yeah. Of course, as I just mentioned, not all the monks are meditating. So normally, for my own experience, so those who monks meditate, normally they're calm, and there's a lot of the wisdom, kind, compassion, flexibility, a lot of good things that I see with my colleagues, my friends. And it's not just, and some monks, of course, the monastery has a lot of things, in Tibet, what we call the summer land has so many things, poisons, medicines, flowers, grow many things. And what we call monastery also like that. So not all the monks like wonderful and just wearing robe, completely enlightened, not like that. Then what is your last question meaning?
Go ahead.
Well,
within that person, are the ones who are able to achieve at the highest level, a geshe, are they already naturally predispositioned or have that ability? And others, can they overcome this, let's say with 10,000 hours, obviously many,
right.
But the fact that they're even able to do it or to get to that level or to create these gamma oscillations throughout their brain, is that such a select subset of people that they're individuals who, as much as they try, will never achieve that, even though they're doing this meditation?
Possible. But it's very important that motivation also. So if you have interest and motivation, and if you meet the right teaching, normally, it's a lot of good result if you practice. But even if you don't have real motivation, maybe you become geshe, and the motivation is something else, then you may not achieve that. Even you do retreat, may not achieve that. So view and motivation, these two are very important.
Just getting back to this, Richie, maybe I could add. So, of course, you're familiar with the prairie voles. And
Sure.
we also have a subset of humans who have oxytocin receptor differences, and it has a profound effect. Do you think that with teaching you can overcome?
So just to give some background, what Jim is referring to is a body of research that began with prairie voles, and there are different species of prairie vole, some of which have monogamous relationships, others of which don't. And there are differences in a particular molecule, the oxytocin system, the oxytocin molecule, and receptors for oxytocin, which is a neuromodulator in the brain and plays a very important role in regulating social behavior. And what Jim is referring to is that there have been a set of studies which have identified genetic differences in the oxytocin receptor, which regulates some aspects of social behavior. And I think what you're asking, Jim, is whether if you have a polymorphism, a genetic difference, which leads you to be less socially responsive, can training of the sort that Rinpoche has guided us through help to overcome those kind of genetic variations? What I would say is maybe, I don't know. I think
Bringing up provocative questions.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question, and but I also would like to remind us that if you actually look carefully at those studies, actually these what we call single nucleotide polymorphisms, these are genetic differences among people that have been studied in relation to behavioral characteristics. If you look at the aggregate body of literature for any of these polymorphisms, they account for a minuscule amount of variance in the behavioral characteristic. So it's true that they're real, that they do impact some aspects of social behavior, but the vast majority of the variance in any particular behavior is not explained by the polymorphism, the genetic difference. So,
Well, or we don't know enough to use that information to explain it. I mean, if we don't have the knowledge.
That's true. You're absolutely right. So it could be that with other kinds of measures, they would account for more variance. That's absolutely true. So, I mean, I think the bottom line is that the kinds of studies that Jim is alluding to need to be done. And we need to discover and investigate whether, and some of the variation that Rinpoche was talking about, it may be that if you sampled a large group of people and taught them these kinds of practices, you'll see some natural variation in how easily a person relates to these practices, how motivated they may be in doing them, and some of those variations may relate to these genetic differences.
Well, it may be about one's, as an example, if you use athletics or a particular sport, some people are potentially more genetically positioned to excel at one versus another.
Just one other point about that is that with the possible exception of autism, any other behavioral characteristic, there's less than 50% of the variance in any other behavioral characteristic that's explained by genetics. So
and this can go back to literature related to happiness, right?
Right. So I would say that while all of this is true, it may not matter. We're not going to change the structural genome. That's going to, I mean, no one really believes that. We can potentially change gene expression, but putting all that aside, I think there's at least half the variance, which is accounted for by other non-genetic factors, and so that's something we can do something about. So I think that we should take that as a motivation and an inspiration that we really can make a difference. I think even taking a serious account of these genetic variations.
Rinpoche, let me ask you a question. We have been talking about happiness and how these practices can bring us happiness. Maybe both of you can comment on the difference between happiness and meaning in life. Because there could be instances where people have done like Mother Teresa as an example, who has done extraordinarily meaningful work, yet I'm not sure if happiness is the right word to characterize her. What do you think the difference are? Are there physiologic differences, and why does it matter or does it matter? I'll ask you first, Rinpoche. I'll put you on this.
There's, according to happiness, there are two kinds of happiness. Normally, what we call happiness is kind of like feeling of happy, right? So, hoo-hoo, high feeling. And that happiness not last long, and also need to depend on something. Maybe happy hours, maybe
Tesla. We were joking about that earlier.
The last meditation session, I used a lot of Tesla about these things. Or relationship, or stock market, money, fame, whatever. So that's the normal happiness. And there's another more deeper level of happiness, which is to connect with your inner well-being, your basic goodness, the happiness developed within yourself. So I think that is more connected with the meaning, I think. Meaning of life also connected, meaningful. And that happiness has awareness, connected with love and compassion. And so the normal happiness, maybe you're looking for meaning of life, maybe you may not be happy, you struggle to achieve that life, even though you're not happy, but you still continue, you do something. And also, what is the meaning of life also depends, right? What kind of meaning? So the meaning is also depends on yourself. Everybody has little bit different meaning of life. Maybe the meaning of life is a relationship. Maybe meaning of life is just play stock market. Maybe meaning of life, maybe go to happy hour. So also depends. So, but if we look at meaning like more deeper level, more spiritual level, more something related with the virtue, then the happiness which is developed within you, and that meaning of life, I think is kind of the same.
So, in some ways, this relates to Maslow's hierarchy. But do you feel that they're the same? This, if you will, this deeper sense of happiness is equivalent to sort of a life of meaning?
I certainly think that they're intimately connected. I certainly share your intuition about that. And one of the things that we've been slowly trying to do is to use the word, the term well-being as maybe a better term than happiness, because a lot of the use of happiness refers to the kind of ephemeral happiness, the transient happiness that Rinpoche was... The happiness associated with rewards, with external conditions, which of course change and don't produce enduring happiness. And so well-being, I mean, I think it's quite possible for a person to show very high levels of well-being and to be sad. I've seen the Dalai Lama be told about, torture in Tibet and see him visibly cry. And that doesn't mean he doesn't have high levels of well-being. It's a spontaneous expression of sadness in response to that situation. And in the next moment, he can see something funny and start laughing, and that's totally appropriate. And that's also a kind of non-stickiness. So I think that it's an important issue, and it's one of the reasons why I've tried to, in a nuanced way, differentiate the kind of well-being that we talk about in the contemplative science area from positive psychology, which is a little more focused on happiness and may not be the kind of enduring happiness that is associated with meaning.
We were talking about generosity, and you used it as an example to be associated with well-being. And then we look at the ever-increasing inequality of wealth as an example, yet oftentimes people who have great wealth are the least generous people. Do you have any thoughts or either?
Yeah, good idea. Good question. Sometimes there's some kind of general concept, If you are kind, care, compassion, then you have to let go of worldly things. You let go of business, you let go of fame, don't do so many things, be passive than active. So there's some kind of belief, I think, in the modern society, in the modern culture. And then if you want to be very active and want to do something like successful in the business field or whatever, then you might think less compassion. So once we have this belief in our society, then when people practice the compassion, then it's automatically kind of you think that, this is not right and I cannot do that. If I choose to be very successful, that means I'm a bad person maybe. Maybe I'm aggressive and I should not look for the compassion, all these things. So also social belief, general situation, like Stanford, what do you call it?
The prison
experiment. There's some kind of belief, if I'm a businessman and I should act this way. If I practice compassion, I should act this way. So I think these things really involve. But actually, if you can become compassionate person with the wisdom, compassion always need with wisdom, right? You can be successful person with generosity also. And I heard of that. Some successful person actually need to give. So if you don't give, you cannot gain also. So the giving is part of success. If you want to become very good business person or whatever, successful, we are social being, right? We live in this social world. We need to connect each other. So what we call win-win situation. Others win, then you win. Otherwise, you just think of yourself and selfish and don't care about others. Maybe you achieve something, but eventually it will have a lot of side effect. So, therefore, yeah.
Well, one of the things I initially thought of when you asked the question, Jim, is there's a recent survey done among academic disciplines, and they looked at the amount of charitable donations by discipline, and guess which discipline had the most stingy, the least charitable?
Psychology?
The economists. So, I think that I would actually be interested. I don't know the real data on the scaling of charitable contributions by income. I know that they're among people who are really at the bottom of the income bracket, particularly among African Americans who belong to churches, who are active members of churches, the percentage of their income that they give to the church is extremely high, and often is the percentage of their yearly income that they give to that charitable cause is typically much higher than people who are much wealthier. And it's interesting because the charitable cause that they typically donate to is a spiritual. It is what is meaningful spiritually to them. And I think that for the really wealthy people who are not as generous, it may be that they don't have that same kind of spiritual values. And so I think you're calling attention to an unfortunate byproduct of our modern culture.
Well, even the work of, is it Paul Piff? And this idea that oftentimes it's been shown that the wealthy are not able to interpret microfacial expressions of individuals who are suffering. And the postulate is that for most of us in the world to survive in the world, it's a matter of compromise, acceptance, negotiation, quid pro quo. And for that subset of people, because they never have to they start becoming insensitive to these types of signals because they don't have to pay attention to those types of signals. And
yeah, I think it's a difficult problem.
Well, it's one that's going to, if it keeps getting worse, the outcome is not going to be good, unfortunately. Let me ask you another question. Also, you had mentioned, was it prior to the 90s, that there was not the word compassion or these types of terms. And, I think wasn't that sort of really the start of the positive psychology movement? Because at least in medicine, what is Western medicine? It's the treatment of illness. It's not the promotion of wellness, right? And therein lies the problem. Mm-hmm. And we know that if we promote wellness, you get rid of most diseases. And in fact, as an example, prior to 1926, it had never been reported that an American Indian had diabetes mellitus, ever, until they started using the Western diet. And now we're seeing obesity rates around the world secondary to the false promise of engaging in Western behavior, right? And all with that comes diabetes, increased frequency of cancers, chronic diseases, all due to inflammation, which is interesting because we know utilizing some of the practices that we've discussed really decreases inflammation. And in fact, cardiac disease, a lot of it is associated with chronic inflammation. So it is an interesting paradox that, we have people come from what are nominally called third world countries for the American dream of conspicuous consumption, yet they leave a place that have some of the richest traditions that we're talking about for the false promise of consumerism and being less healthy, I think, unfortunately. We were talking about the prison experiment. Do you know Kiran Bedi in India?
I don't.
Well, this is germane to the question of the young man who was asking about the Stanford prison experiment. And it's interesting because she's an Indian woman. Actually, I think she won the highest medal that India gives. And what she did was she recommended Vipassana meditation.
This is the
yes.
doing Vipassana. Or the pardon? Yeah. I've
exactly.
seen the documentary.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because what happened is she recommended meditation. She was one of the first women police officers in India, in Delhi, and she recommended this types of meditation practice because of its very positive effects on her, and she thought it could improve the behavior of police officers. And to get rid of her and stop her from being an irritant to the police chief, he sent her to the worst jail in India, which had no funding, horrible violence. It was just a horrible place. And she actually instituted it there. And it had such a profound effect on decreasing violence and improving the morale of prisoners that now it's been implemented all over India and also back to the police officers. So it's just, so she got back at him ultimately. Let me ask you another question. We've really been focused on compassion here. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was saying, and this was from a hedge fund manager, and he was bragging, or maybe making a statement, how they require all of their traders to take mindfulness practices because it improves their trading. And maybe you can comment about, which I think you alluded to, is compassion and wisdom, and this idea of this ability to improve your attention, but without the other component, it's hollow, I think. And maybe you could comment on that, because not once in this article that said, and because of our improved productivity or results, we have become more philanthropic and we care for people. I didn't even see that at all in the article. Maybe you could comment on that.
Normally what we call balance. So balance is very important. Sometimes when we work at workplace too tight, there's a lot of stress, a lot of nervous, and our mind is not calm and peace. So if you play stock market, maybe if your mind too tight, and then you do more mistakes, you may not see the bigger picture, and a lot of stuff is going on in your mind. So instead, be present with the stock market. There's so many things going on internally. So, for example, you showed this pain meditation, right? Mm-hmm. So by meditation, we are not become like passive, Many people think when you meditate, you lost emotion, you lost feeling, then you cannot enjoy happy hour. And
is that the name of your next book?
Happy hour? So, and what you become is like peaceful zombie. But it's not become like that. So you can be more present with the whatever things there, but your mind not attached to that. It will not bring all this junk with you and ruminate, So this is why after the pain, what do you call this? Got drop.
Recovery
more fast. So if whatever you do in your life, driving, you drive very narrow and this guy, cutting my line, you jerk. And then more accident, right? You do more misturn. Whether you don't have to turn, but you turn and mistakenly you brake and accident, a lot of things can happen. But your mind more calm, relaxed, and you see certainly your visual become bigger, and you do less mistake. You can be present with them, your situation, whatever you're driving or whatever. So it's not just for the stock market, driving car, relationship, business, study also, of course with the meditation. So what we call, one of the important is the balance, finding balance. So for example, if I want to drink this, no water, sorry. I have coffee here. Someone put coffee here. So if you want to drink this coffee, normally there's what I call 3 methods, 3 ways to drink coffee. So I will show you, right? So I will do a little bit, action.
Acting?
Demonstration.
Acting.
Acting show. So 3 style. First, I need to drink this coffee. 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 Oops, sorry. So,
You're a good actor.
Pardon?
You're a good actor.
Thank you very much. I trained this for many years, And the second style is, oh gosh, I need to drink this coffee. Coffee, happy hour. Coffee. Tomorrow I'm drinking coffee. So, second style. Third style, relax your hand, grab the cup, and drink. So, which one you like? First one? How many of you like first one? Second one? Third one? Or most of you like third one. You like, but come to the practice, it's not so easy. But if you can, I assume that why you like third one is third one has balance. You relax, not too tight, but not too loose. So first one is too tight, second one is too loose, last one has balance. So by meditation, you can find balance. So therefore, I think, good.
For a minute, I thought you were telling Goldilocks. Remember, it's the bed's too soft, the other's too hard, and then there's one that's just right. You probably don't know Goldilocks
I don't know
and the Three
Goldilocks.
Bears. So it's a Tibetan story.
Oh, really? Yeah. You know this story? You know? You don't know?
Maybe you can give some further insights, Rich, into that, if you remember the question.
I remember the question. So, the question is really about the commodification of mindfulness, is really the question. And there are folks in our center who refer to this as mindfulness. I think that it is definitely a concern. And one of the things that I've learned so much from Rinpoche about is the importance of motivation and the view. And so when we sit down to practice, we're not practicing primarily to increase our productivity, or we're not practicing primarily even for our own well-being. We're really practicing for the impact that it has on others. And I think that invoking that kind of motivation and intention is so important. And one of our colleagues, Mingyur, he's made a commitment no longer to ever use the word mindfulness by itself. He calls it caring mindfulness, to imply that when mindfulness is really practiced in the way that it was talked about in the original context, it's practiced in the service of others. And to convey that sense. And so I think that what we're seeing, unfortunately, is, and not unexpectedly given its popularity, is this proliferation of these variants that are really very much self-focused, and I think have the potential of reifying, really reifying problems, and can be very counterproductive. And so it's a real issue, and I think that I'm not sure exactly what to do about it other than to draw attention to these distinctions, and also to show, I think it's going to be important to investigate scientifically what's the difference between, actually this is an important issue, it's never been studied scientifically yet. If you teach a person a simple secular mindfulness practice just by itself versus teach them that same practice but done with this more extended view where they develop the understanding that they're engaging in this practice really primarily for the benefit of others. Is there a difference in the brain? when they do it under those conditions. And my sense is that we may actually be able to detect some differences. That when it's done with this other kind of motivation, the motivation to serve others, it really may be cultivating somewhat different qualities.
Well, the reason I bring that up, and I think you're aware, Jinpa, His Holiness's primary English translator, a former monk, he actually has been involved with CCARE since its founding and was actually intimately involved in that. But we worked 3 years with him, and actually, I should say we, that's the imperial we. I just was there. But we had some great input from PhD psychologists to create our compassion cultivation training program because of our own feeling and what you were alluding to, this sense that with the commodification of mindfulness, it can become an empty practice. So that's why the core, while we teach attention and focus in our own program, really the core of it is compassion for yourself, compassion for others, and ultimately being of service to others. And when I was talking about meaning in life, really, I think that when we look at this, it's service to others that creates really a meaningful life.
Absolutely. And going back to your earlier question about happiness, there's a very well-known social psychologist at Harvard by the name of Dan Gilbert, and he published a book that was a very important book several years ago, and the title of the book was Stumbling on Happiness. And what he really was referring to in the title is that we seek all kinds of external conditions of the sort that Rinpoche was describing, happy hour, Teslas, whatever it is, all these external conditions to try to generate happiness. And ultimately, and the empirical research shows this, even lottery winners who win, just a huge windfall, they're not any more happy a year after they win the lottery than they were before. In fact, there's some data to suggest that they're less happy. And so I think that this is really an important issue, and it really has a lot to do with this sense of meaning and purpose.
It's interesting. What's even more profound, I think, than the lottery winners, studies have been done on people who become quadriplegic or have suffered devastating events in their lives, physical health events, and at the end of a year, they're also back at their baseline, which I think really relates to this issue of resilience and being able to cope with adversity. And I think these types of practices really, at least the evidence to date, shows that they can have a huge impact on giving us a toolbox where we're able to face life easier. And certainly, I think we also know that when we, with intention, practice compassion, which leads us to have more connection with others, not only just by the way we're hardwired, it gives us meaning and purpose, but it also gives us a network that allows us to face adversity better, I think, as well. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming today. This is the end of our program. And so thank you, Richie. Thank you, Rinpoche. And thank all of you. And before you start clapping, because I do want that, is that I want to thank all of our volunteers and all of those who have helped make this program possible, as well as our benefactors, because without you, the work that we do cannot happen. So if we could just acknowledge those individuals, I would appreciate it.